For 6 years, Omar Khadr has been in U.S. custody. And for 6 years, Canada has pretty much taken a hands-off approach. Khadr still has no trial date on charges of killing an American soldier.
May be set this week by a military judge in Guantanamo Bay. But will the U.S. process be fair? Many Canadian MPs don't think so. They're preparing a formal push to have him brought home. The CBC's Susan Ormiston now, with the pressure building on the Canadian government to help Omar Khadr.
He's an accused murderer and al-Qaeda fighter.
You know, I think he's a criminal, and I think he's a terrorist.
But that's not everyone's view.
He's personable, he's decent, he's kind, he's good-hearted.
Omar Khadr is a Canadian, the only Westerner left at the U.S. detention center at Guantanamo.
He's been in solitary confinement for years. I mean, there are enormous psychological impacts.
Only 15 when he arrived, Khadr is now 21, stuck in a legal limbo as he awaits trial for the death of an American soldier. How did a young boy become a so-called enemy combatant caught up in the U.S.'s war on terror?
This bottom chunk right here, that's where Omar was.
You have to go back to July 2002 in Khost, Afghanistan. U.S. Special Forces were on patrol for al-Qaeda.
So that's the spot in there where Omar was hiding.
Sergeant Lane Morris's team circled a compound with armed fighters holed up inside. Afghan translators went in first. They were shot dead.
You can see all the bullet holes through the door.
The U.S. soldiers returned fire, killing 3 al-Qaeda fighters.
Well, then we're shooting at them. They're shooting us, and they're throwing grenades at us. They're throwing grenades over the wall at us. So we got to kind of back up and get out of the way of the hand grenades.
But not far enough. Morris went down when shrapnel blinded him in one eye. Air support was called in. 2 500-pound bombs dropped on the compound. Everything went quiet. The Americans moved in, confident everyone was dead. Then suddenly, a grenade whizzed over a wall. Sergeant Christopher Spear was hit by shrapnel, mortally wounded. But who threw that grenade is a matter of intense dispute. Lane Morris's version.
Omar pops up, throws the grenade, shoots the pistol. The grenade goes off. Somebody returns fire, hitting Omar a couple of times. He goes down. There's no one else in the compound.
That story's not true.
What part?
None of it.
Lieutenant Commander William Keebler was appointed by the U.S. military to defend Khadr at Guantanamo.
There was at least one other adult combatant alive in the compound when U.S. forces stormed it. That individual was actually fighting U.S. forces, unlike Omar, who was, according to one key government witness, sort of sitting down, facing away from the fight, slumped over against a bush, suffering from what we know to be fairly serious wounds to his eyes at that point when he was shot in the back at least twice.
Did anybody see Khadr throw the grenade?
You know, I've heard a couple of guys say that the direction that the grenade came from was the direction that Omar was hiding.
By then, Morris, wounded, had been medevaced out. No one actually saw Omar Khadr throw a grenade. And last February, a document leaked from Guantanamo seemed to confirm Khadr was not the sole survivor. The eyewitness account by a soldier, identified only as OC-1, said there was another man firing on U.S. soldiers when they entered. As for Khadr, he was shot twice in the back, the bullets exiting out his chest. An American medic patched him up enough to save him. He was transported to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, a U.S. captive. Within months, he was shackled and hooded like this in a plane en route to Guantanamo. The U.S. administration desperately wants and needs a conviction soon from the detainees to justify Guantanamo's very existence. Omar Khadr's case is seen as one of the simplest. One guy, accused of throwing one grenade, kills a U.S. soldier. It's understandable, saleable in the otherwise shadowy war on terror. But Khadr's case has proved to be resiliently complicated. The American case against Khadr stands on some highly controversial evidence. First, Khadr's role in Al-Qaeda. That is, what he confessed to under intense interrogation at Bagram and later at Guantanamo. There are videos, which we can't see, and interrogators were told to tear up their notes. But his defense team is convinced Khadr's treatment bordered on torture.
U.S. lawyer for a time. He visited him over a dozen times in 2005 and 2006. Khadr told him about the interrogations.
Sometimes they had him essentially hogtied so that he was on his stomach and his wrists and were pulled behind his back and his ankles were pulled up and the four limbs were shackled together.
The techniques are often called stress positions. Once, when Khadr had been in this position so long, he urinated on himself.
The guards came in and lifted him up, two on each side, and poured a pine solvent, kind of a pine sol cleaner on him and on the urine in front of him, and literally used him as a human mop to clean up the mess, and then left him in it and left him in those clothes for a couple of days. He gave us very detailed descriptions, dates, times, descriptions of the people involved.
It's Khadr's word only, but one of his main interrogators, a U.S. soldier, has since been convicted of assault in the death of another detainee at Bagram. Also key to the prosecution's case is a video. It shows Khadr as a teenager with other men apparently wiring up explosives. It's a powerful bit of evidence, allegedly found in the compound after the battle, tying Khadr directly to Al-Qaeda. But Lieutenant Commander Keebler has a different interpretation of the video.
And I think it shows a 15-year-old boy under the control of a bunch of much older people. He's a victim of others, you know, and it's not just my perception. I think that's the law's perception. That's why we have a child soldier protocol. That's why we have special laws for juveniles that hold them less accountable than adults are held, because the law generally views children as less culpable and less responsible for their decisions.
What is Canada doing to defend the rights of this young Canadian citizen?
Back in 2002, Ottawa was equally concerned that Khadr, just a kid, was in U.S. custody in Afghanistan.
We continue to press the United States to ensure that his rights will be protected.
They were asking questions about whether he was a direct participant in hostilities or was just a bystander. They were asking what the legal basis was for holding him.
The Canadian government sent a letter to U.S. authorities warning that Khadr's age provided for special treatment. It would be inappropriate for Mr. Khadr to be transferred to the detention facilities at Guantanamo Bay, it said. But then the tune changed. Legal advisors told Canada's Foreign Affairs Department to back off raising his young age as an issue, and Khadr was sent to Guantanamo. All that seemed forgotten in the ensuing 6 years. No government has since intervened. Omar Khadr was just 9 when his family first attracted attention. He was born in Canada, but his family had moved to Pakistan. He and his siblings were indoctrinated by their father into the world of jihad. For a time, the family lived in a compound set up by Osama bin Laden. His brothers were sent to training camps in Afghanistan. The U.S. says Omar was too. In a CBC interview in 2004, his mother Maha and sister Zainab said they were proud of Omar's bravery.
Wouldn't you like your Canadian son to be so brave to stand and fight for his right? Wouldn't you like that?
He'd been bombarded for 4 hours. I mean, it's a war. You're shooting at him. Why can't he shoot at you? If you kill 3, why can't he kill 1? I mean, why does nobody say you killed 3 of his friends? Why does everybody say he killed an American soldier? Big deal.
It leaves a terrible taste. And the family, in their perspective of things, have not made the case any simpler in regards to at least the Canadian people.
Senator Romeo Dallaire, one of Canada's most decorated soldiers, has taken up the case. For him, Khadr's life story fits perfectly with that of a child soldier, someone forced into an armed conflict when they're too young to refuse.
Some Canadians would say, is Omar Khadr really a child soldier? His family was indoctrinating him, was leading him into fighting. That was their values. That's what led him there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the child soldier and the protocol is quite clear that anyone under the age of 18 is not allowed to be indoctrinated, trained, equipped, nor used in conflict.
The U.S. tribunal in Guantanamo recently threw out any consideration of Khadr as a child soldier. More reason, says Dallaire, for Canada to protect his rights.
That you are not allowed to go against those conventions. And if you do, you're going down the same road as those who absolutely don't believe them at all.
Sir, I submit that the only thing extreme here is what you're saying.
Because the United States is panicking because it was attacked in its homeland, it was found vulnerable, and it is still responding in an extremist fashion, that it is dragging the rest of us down that same road where the extremists are. We don't have the right to abdicate our responsibility because we don't like the smell of it.
Problem is, Omar Khadr's case is steeped in politics. His family has stoked extremist fears in Canada. His mother and sister's views and sympathy for Al-Qaeda make them the family Canadians love to hate.
People should get their children trained in
Swimming,
aiming or sniping, and
horseback riding.
Yeah, horseback riding. These are the three most important things for a child to learn, even before he learns to read and write.
They have said some things that are deplorable and offensive, and there has been a general, I think, unwillingness or reluctance on the part of Canadians to sort of view Omar as a separate individual, apart from his family and some of their comments.
In 6 years, Omar has talked to his mother only a few times. He says he now believes he's in Guantanamo because of his family, and seems to be distancing himself from their radical views. Officials from Foreign Affairs describe Khadr at 21 as likable, funny and intelligent. A top U.S. guard there says he's salvageable, non-radicalized, a good kid. But he's still guilty, according to retired Sergeant Lane Morris. He wants a conviction and stiff penalty for Khadr.
I'm not suggesting that Omar should spend the rest of his life in jail or be executed. I'd be okay with those things.
Morris believes you can't separate Omar from the Khadrs, whom he regards as Canadians of convenience.
It's hypocritical, on the one hand, to just trash everything Western culture and society, and then when things aren't going well for you, pull out the Canadian passports and want to call time out, come back to Canada, and rest up for wherever the next jihad is.
That's got nothing to do with the fact that a 15-year-old had 2 big bullet holes in him and has been 6 years in jail. It's got nothing to do with it.
In Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, compared to other detainees, Omar Khadr is a bit player. Still 6 years in detention, he waits without a trial date, as 2 countries wrestle with his fate. Susan Ormiston, CBC News.